The NFL franchise tag deadline coming 4 Eastern on Tuesday. Teams that intend to tag impending unrestricted free agents must do so prior to. The Cincinnati Bengals tending to business on Monday, placing the tag on wide receiver T. Higgins for the second consecutive season. The year 2 figure comes at 20% premium over last year's, meaning Higgins will make just north of $26 million in lieu of long-term security. Now, whether both sides are trying to continue that effort for a long-term deal depends which side you ask. T breaking his own news as he promised in 4 poignant characters. Tag, period. Maybe we just ask our insider, CBS lead NFL insider Jonathan Jones. JJ, great to see you with some news maybe we expected to see. Higgins gets the tag ×2, just a couple days removed from Cincy brass pledging to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. In the context of that, is a long-term Higgins deal even a remote possibility at this point?
It's a possibility, but it certainly seems like it is remote. So that is a fantastic choice of phrasing there, Joe. Look, here's the thing. This has been going on for 2 seasons now where both sides, they can't agree to terms on a long-term contract. What are the issues? Well, the biggest issue is that Cincinnati frames it as though, hey, you're a number 1 wide receiver, T. We love you as a number 1 wide receiver. T. Higgins says, okay, well then pay me like a number 1 wide receiver. And they say, well, I mean, Jamar and, we got Joe Burrow and Trey Hendrickson and all those things. So we can't actually do that. However, we drafted you and we have this thing called the franchise tag that actually suppresses free agency in an incredible way, in a way that the NFL Players Association should absolutely do away with at some point in the next collective bargaining agreement. But until then, they can still use the tag. And so we see right there, Justin Jefferson at $35 million in average annual value. You go $1 over that, and Jamar Chase becomes the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. But it is not just that. And in fact, the Bengals have a deal on the table, similar to the deal that was on the table at the start of the league year last year. Or rather, at the start of the regular season, I should say. That's around $37 million in average annual value. Jamar Chase wants even more than that. And so the Bengals are saying, well, we can't go that high. We can't go $4, $5, $6 million above the top of the market. The Bengals need Jamar Chase to happen so that the rest of the dominoes fall, so that Trey Hendrickson and his contract can be taken care of. And then lastly, for T. Higgins, who, look, he and his representation, and he got new representation a couple of months ago. It actually happens to be Jamar Chase's agent. And so that's a unique sort of aspect of all of this. But what T wants is what other teams are seemingly willing to give him, but they're not going to get their hands on him. If you're the New England Patriots, you can get word back to T. Higgins, hey, we'd pay him $32 million per year. And he's going to hear these numbers and figures. And ultimately, that's not what the Bengals are willing to pay him. And so what is ultimately going to happen? There's not going to be a long-term deal reached anytime soon. They have until the middle of July. And then, of course, if no deal is done at that point, he would be playing on the franchise tag for a second consecutive year. This is a conclusion right now that does not satisfy anyone. The Bengals want to bring that number down by giving him a long-term deal, and he wants the long-term deal. They can't agree on the numbers.
It makes you root for the guy when he's out there on the football field to keep balling out under his own name. And for Cincinnati, you can only sell the naming rights to that stadium once. Deadlines do spur action, JJ. Again, 4 Eastern Tuesday for the tag deadline on pending UFAs. What's the latest you're hearing on other fronts? Some names that tag candidates we identified prior to this cycle.
All right, so we'll look at 2. And one is Osa Odigizua with the Dallas Cowboys. We had heard back during the Combine in Indianapolis that they were close on a long-term contract extension. They may still be close, but a deal is not done. And so if we see the Cowboys ultimately tagging Odigizua, I would think that that is what the tag was more or less intended for. Hey, let's use this as a placeholder. We're close. We just need a little bit more time to hammer out a deal. And at that point, I think a deal would get done before the start of free agency come 4 p.m. Eastern on March the 12th. So be on the lookout for that. Another one, Sam Darnold with the Minnesota Vikings. Look, here's going to be the interesting part. I don't think that the Vikings are going to tag Sam Darnold for them. I think that they could tag him for another team. Okay, and so look, that's going to be the unique part. The Vikings could tag him, they could trade him to another team, and then that team would have already worked out a long-term extension with Sam Darnold, or at least there would be a promise between sides that a deal would get done, or Sam Darnold would go somewhere that he wants to go, and maybe he would play under the tag there or not. But this is one of those interesting things where it takes three to tango. Again, the player doesn't have a lot of say on the tag, right? If teams want to issue the tag, they can do it. The player who is tagged may not have a whole lot of say about where he goes. If a team wants to trade him to the highest bidder, they could. But that team that would be trading for Sam Darnold wouldn't do so unless they knew that Sam Darnold wanted to be there. One team that I've heard kicked around a little bit that I can go ahead and tell you he's not going to is the New York Giants. It did not work out in that market, in that area where he went with the Jets. I don't know even if the Giants don't really have that much interest. So that's not a place. Maybe the Raiders, we'll see. But anyway, the point being, if the Vikings do tag Sam Darnold by the deadline, it is not for the Minnesota Vikings. They may still want Sam Darnold back in 2025, but that would be on a contract that would be apart from the franchise tag. So it'll be unique to see what happens by Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, what seems like a matter of money can be more of a matter of time. Time and money is sort of the through line to my next question here, because let's work backwards. Trey Smith got hit with the tag, and that came shortly, and I mean shortly after the league released its increased salary cap figure. Now recouped from where it was, that brief COVID downtick. Has that record number, cap-wise, affected the way the teams are approaching the franchise tag during this cycle in any way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Joe, and I appreciate it because we have seen these record spikes the last 2 years. And so did that historic cap number and figure for the 2025 season impact these franchise tags? Well, in the past, we've seen a whole lot more tags than we have right now, or we will get ahead of this free agency. However, I mean, it didn't really impact the T. Higgins one. They were always going to tag him almost no matter what the number was going to be. But perhaps the Kansas City Chiefs, with another $5 to $7 million than they had budgeted for, said, you know what, let's go ahead and tag Trey Smith, because even though the market for a guard is around $21 million, well, we can tag him at 24, which is a bit unheard of, going $3 million over the top of the market, especially for an interior offensive lineman and at that position. But I think that probably a little extra money on the cap and in the budget may have made that possible. Again, I don't know that anything outside of that was impacted by this rise in the salary cap. Ultimately, I think a lot of teams did some pretty good forecasting, some pretty good projecting, and realized this is probably going to be a weaker free agency class, right? We're not talking about all the stars at the top of it. You remember the quarterback carousels from the last 2 years. We don't have those type of players necessarily. Quarterbacks will go places, but it is not the caliber of player that we have seen the last 2 years. And you can go on and on with edge rushers or wide receivers, some of these top positions where we do not see those kinds of players. And so because of that, because teams have forecasted this for the past year and a half, and because they look at the draft and say, look, there may not be blue chip, generational, Hall of Fame and gold jacket 20 years from now players in this draft, there's a whole slew of guys picking between 15 and 45 that can absolutely be solid starters and potentially Pro Bowlers for this group. And so because of that, you're not seeing the tag come out like you have in previous years.
Jonathan Jones, we appreciate your point of view as always and your time. I'm sure we'll talk soon. All right, here's a look at your notable upcoming dates. Again, franchise tag deadline for pending unrestricted free agents coming on Tuesday at 4 Eastern time. Then the free agency frenzy. Maybe some of those names that end up UFAs do find their future not too long after that March 10th date. And then April, your NFL draft, where we talk about the future talent.